Get smart with your spending with Nucenda's Breeze debit card. We've got your back by offering safe and easy access to your money. Never any hidden fees, just an account that makes sense. Download the Nucenda app to enroll in mobile and internet banking, managing your funds, making person-to-person transfers, and rounding up purchases to save. Visit Nucenda.org to explore Breeze accounts and join our credit union.
New members must be eligible for membership. Equal opportunity lender. Insured by NCUA.
Good day, folks, and welcome to another edition of Inside Santa Fe Public Schools podcast. I am Joe Abeta, and before we get started, I'd like to thank our podcast sponsor, our only sponsor, Nucenda Credit Union. I want to thank them for being a proud sponsor of the Inside Santa Fe Public Schools podcast, and we appreciate that. And with that, I'd like to get to our guest today. We have two guests today. Our first guest is lead nurse of Santa Fe Public Schools, Myrna Barber, and she brought along with us also a Santa Fe Public School nurse, Bonnie Lochner. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Thank you for having us.
I appreciate you.
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I know that we're here to talk about school vaccination, which is very important. I know that we sent out a reminder to everybody out there that they need to get their school vaccinations done because of state mandate. And we'll get to that. But I first wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about yourselves. You know, how'd you get into to being a school nurse? You know, it's always a very important. I remember when I was a kid in elementary school, the school nurse was awesome. You know, you had to go, check your fever, and then they would give the go ahead if you were going home to be able to watch The Price is Right or whatever afternoon programming was going on, and some chicken soup. So that's how I remember. I always think fondly of my school nurse back in the day. So, so let's start out. So, Bonnie, let's start with you, Bonnie. And so how'd you get into nursing, and then how did it transition over here to the public schools?
I got into nursing through doing some volunteer work across the border in Mexico, and I worked in a clinic there. And when I came back after being there for a couple of years, I decided to go back to school, become a nurse, and I was very invested in community health. So initially, I worked as a pediatric ICU nurse and in the ER here at Christus, and worked in some community health clinics.
Okay.
And then I came to school nursing, and I love it.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Myrna, how about you?
Yeah, just want to say that we're so lucky to have Bonnie on our team.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
So I went to nursing school actually with the desire to work in a public health setting. I sort of imagined myself in maybe like a county health department or something like that. But I also love working with kids. And so school nursing is sort of the perfect combination of those interests, community health and pediatrics. So I've been with SFPS for 10 years and I love it.
That's awesome. 10 years. That's good stuff. It goes by fast, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Okay. So I guess the first question of this, because our topic today are school vaccinations. Why is it important for school-aged kids to get vaccinated?
Yeah. So the immunity that we acquire from our childhood vaccines stays with us for a lifetime. And so really, while it's uncomfortable for us to get poked as babies and little kids, that immunity that those vaccines provide keeps us healthy for the rest of our lives. It also helps to protect vulnerable family members, like babies that are too young to receive many of these vaccines, and also elderly people that they may live or interact with.
Mm-hmm. Have you guys seen, as far as, I know that I remember having to get vaccinated for certain things that the doctors, they would require us to do that before school started. It's an annual thing, right? Where you guys have to remind folks, and especially for the newer students or the new students in kindergarten, but also the students that are coming into our district for the first time. It's an annual thing that happens, correct?
Yeah. We're, as a school nurse in the schools, we are constantly looking at folks' vaccination records because it comes up in the beginning of the school year that they need to get vaccines, but sometimes it comes with their birthday. Like they age into getting a certain vaccine. So we're always looking at that.
And it's easier now, right? You guys aren't going through like this file wall of everybody to make sure, right? It's pretty electronic now, isn't it? I mean, as far as figuring out who needs it and whatnot, right?
Yeah, so most states throughout the U.S. have an immunization database where providers are required to put in any vaccinations that are given into this electronic database. So that's really helpful. We do have a lot of students who transfer in from out of state or from out of the U.S. And so in those cases, we often are looking at like a paper vaccine record and sort of doing a little reconciliation between what have they had, what's required here in New Mexico, is there anything missing?
What's required here of New Mexico is...
Yeah, so a DTaP series, which is protective against diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. MMR, which protects against mumps, measles, and rubella. Varicella, polio, hepatitis A and B. Those are going to be the ones for our younger students. And then as they get older, it's recommended that they get a Tdap booster at age 12, so for entry into 7th grade, along with a meningococcal vaccine that prevents meningitis. In high school, they also have to get a booster to that meningococcal vaccine. So, some immunity does wane over time, and that's why even for us as adults, it's recommended that we have a Tdap booster every 10 years, and especially if we have some sort of injury that might put us at risk for tetanus, they recommend that we get that protective booster.
These all sound very familiar. These have been around for a long time, right? These vaccinations, most of them?
Sure. Yeah. These vaccines these ones that we're talking about have been around for a long time. There's been some changes over the years to some of them. Some of them used to be live vaccines. They're not live anymore. But for the most part, these vaccines that we're giving out right now have been around for quite a while.
Yeah. And they're put in place because all these things that you mentioned, if they get into our body or if they grow into something else, it can be pretty bad, right? I mean, they can, and it's not more of a scare tactic, but it's like, well, there's a reason why we're doing this, right?
Exactly. So, we're talking about illnesses that can be extremely debilitating. And most of us are lucky enough that we grow up in a part of the world and in a time where we don't know people who've been affected by them. But for example, polio can lead to paralysis. Meningitis, we know, can lead to death. There's a reason that these vaccines are on the schedule that they are. And there's doctors from all over the world who come together to make these schedules. And these schedules are made to protect kids and keep them safe from these things because we want them to have the healthiest positive existence that they can have.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'm just thinking of this kind of in the whole world thing. I'm sure, I know that when polio was, they found a cure to it or a vaccine, right, to prevent it from happening, people were really happy, right? There was a lot of happiness about it. And I know recently I remember, and this is from my own experience, I'm not, I'm just saying, but I remember when I got my first vaccination for COVID, I was crying, literally bawling because I got that shot. And because I felt like we were moving on from this really dark time that we were in. And it just made me so happy that I was getting it. And, just a personal feeling about how I felt about that. But they are important and they're there for us to protect us, right? Everybody.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring that up because my mom talks about when she was going to elementary school before there was immunization with polio. And she would look the first day of school, she would look around in her classroom and see which students did not return, which students were in braces, who was in a wheelchair. And she even recalls being recalled, like she had to go home during the summer. She was at a summer camp and her mom had to come get her and they had to go home because there was an outbreak. So it was a time that was very scary to that generation. So
yeah, that's true. I mean, and we didn't, back then they didn't have social media, so they couldn't figure out, what was, you just had to take what you saw, right? Your next door neighbor, something like that, of what the effects they had on them. And you said, we got to do this. But go ahead.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's very true. It was about what you saw. That's why that first day of school would be so impactful to my mom and my aunts. And, my father, I'm sure, has the same stories. But I also have seen some of these illnesses as a pediatric ICU nurse, and have had little babies get very, very sick from pertussis and die. And they caught it from their parents.
Oh, wow.
So you find out afterwards that that's what's happened, and it's really very devastating. And I also actually saw a flu case of that on Thanksgiving Day. Wow. So very sad stories when you're in kind of the thick of it in the pediatric ICU. So these illnesses, while we don't see polio here and we don't see some of these other illnesses as frequently, you can come into contact with them when you travel, and also people do get those.
And it's funny you should bring that up, because we all universally have experienced some sort of, we've experienced, not some, but we've experienced COVID. We've seen it. It's been an example of what can happen, right? An outbreak, that we had a modern day outbreak. So it's interesting that you bring that up. It's true. So with that, let me ask you this. What are the exceptions of people getting what are the exceptions, I guess, to getting a vaccination exemption?
Yeah, so here in the state of New Mexico, families can seek immunization exemption for their kids for either medical or religious reasons. This requires an annual application that must be notarized and approved by the Department of Health in order to maintain their compliance for school. So it's something that has to take place each year, and it does last for a year. But that is another route to school compliance for those families who have either a medical or a religious reason for choosing not to immunize their children.
Gotcha. Is there something like say a way of like, well, they can take these ones, but they can't do these ones? Is that possible?
Yeah, exactly. So when families fill out those exemption forms, they have to indicate which immunizations they're seeking to exempt their children for, and it could be just a particular one, or it could be all of them. It just kind of depends on the situation. I do want to emphasize that for those students who have exemptions, if we were to have, for example, a measles case or a varicella case in the schools, those students are looking at a pretty lengthy quarantine period. And so, choosing to seek an exemption is an option, but it can significantly impact a student's ability to attend school if we were to have an outbreak. And we have seen some resurgences of communicable diseases and vaccine preventable diseases in other parts of the U.S., which is why we're really doing this push. We want to make sure that we don't have measles cases and varicella cases in our schools here in New Mexico, because we want everyone to be able to stay healthy and stay in school.
Where can families go to get vaccines?
Yeah, so Bonnie mentioned earlier, most of our pediatricians here in Santa Fe are going to be providing vaccines, not all of them. And there are places that have challenges with keeping them stocked. And so, I've talked to a couple families recently who have attempted to go for their well child visit, and their provider maybe was out of something. And so that kind of puts them behind on what they need for school. So with that said, Santa Fe Public Schools does have a Vaccines for Children program, which means we carry a Class C pharmacy license, and we offer immunizations over at the B.F. Young Professional Building every Friday by appointment. We're also going to have a couple of walk-in days happening. October 25th and November 4th will be walk-in days from 8:30 to 3:30, and all they need to do is come over to B.F. Young, and they can get caught up.
Is it at any cost? Does it cost anything?
No, it's free. So the Vaccines for Children program is a federal program that provides immunizations with the goal of protecting our whole community at no cost to families. Families don't need to have insurance to participate in these clinics. It's free for everybody.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's awesome. So it's very accessible to folks. It's just a matter of them getting there, right? Yeah,
and sometimes we do outreach clinics. So if we have someone maybe who doesn't have transportation, or who, it's a challenge for them to get off work, we can absolutely meet them at their child's school. We can come to them. So
that's awesome. We
want to reduce those barriers.
And just to let the parents know, what we'll do in that case is we'll send home a consent form and what's called the vaccine information sheet. And we just ask that the parents don't even need to be at school if they don't want to. It's up to them.
Okay.
If they send back the consent form filled out, we can go ahead and they're giving consent for us to vaccinate the student at that point.
That's awesome. That's good. Yeah. I know that we talked a little bit about the COVID thing and the pandemic and whatnot, but I wanted to ask, are there still a lot of misinformation out there about vaccines?
Well, that's a complex question, but yes, definitely there is quite a bit of misinformation out there about vaccines.
Yeah.
I think there's also a lot of emotions around it.
Mm-hmm.
The school nursing department under the Office of Student Wellness is not here to give judgment about what people's decisions are. We're just here to support the students so that they can stay in school as much as possible. And so if any parent has a question about a particular vaccine, they can certainly ask the school nurse. And I know that on some occasions, Myrna has jumped in to help clarify as well, because maybe, a parent has been getting information from a variety of sources and really needs to hear again from someone else. And so we make the time to be able to give non-judgmental information, but factual information to the parents.
And that helps out for the parents that are kind of like on the fence. Should I do it or should I not? Right. Because if you're giving non-judgmental information, then it makes it feel like, okay, well then, right. It makes it easier.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of like someone who's kind of trying to make that decision about whether or not they're gonna get their kids those routine immunizations, I would just say that those benefits significantly outweigh the risks. So contracting a vaccine preventable disease can have lifelong ramifications. We talked about that earlier. And we just want our kids to be safe and healthy and make all their dreams come true. So, I would just say that it would be important for them to have a conversation with their child's medical provider, who is the expert in their lives as far as that goes. But I do want to emphasize that the COVID vaccine is not required for school. COVID and flu are just recommended immunizations for all of us, but they're not required for school.
Gotcha. So, I mean, with that, and you guys giving the information, if someone wishes to verify your information or get good information on vaccines, where can they go? Is there a place that they can go? Yeah.
So, I think that's an important thing to point out, is that there are, reliable sources of information about immunizations, and there are some places that aren't so reliable. And so I would just encourage people to check out the Department of Health's website. The Philadelphia Children's Hospital has some great videos about vaccines for young people. There's also a website called immunize.org. Those are going to be evidence-based sources of information about vaccines. I think most people's concern is, are they safe? And in order for vaccines to be approved for use, they typically go through 10 to 15 years of preclinical and clinical trials before the scientists and the researchers are eligible to submit a license request with the FDA. And so, yes, these are vaccines that have been in place for a long time, and they are safe. And if people are looking for information about that, that's where I would recommend they go. That healthychildren.org, immunize.org, Children's Hospital, Philadelphia.
So I guess last question, with all this that has been said today in this podcast, what happens if parents don't get their kids vaccinated and parents don't bring in exemptions? What happens based on what the state law is?
Yeah, so New Mexico state law does require that all children in New Mexico have their routine childhood immunizations in order to be enrolled in school. And so, we're quickly approaching here in Santa Fe Public Schools. We give people a little bit of a grace period until November to get that taken care of. But we are approaching that date of like ultimate deadline, and really students. The district will be implementing the disenrollment process for students who are not compliant by that date. So it's really important. We want everybody to be in school, and we want everybody to be healthy.
Gotcha.
And the school nurses do an outreach. We try to contact the parents 3 different times to give them information, to let them know what's going on, to give them the exemption form if they want it. So I would encourage the parents, guardians of students to return those calls to the school nurses so that we can get that information to them. And there are some cases where I think there might be some belief that, my student is at this particular school, so they have different rules that they go by and they don't need the vaccines, but it's actually an enrollment at any Santa Fe public school, regardless of what that environment looks like.
Okay. So you'll be getting a call from the school nurse if those two, if you no exemption, or you still have not got your.
Well, they probably already have gotten.
Oh yeah,
they probably have.
That's right. That's right. We did send that reminder out though too as well. So yeah. But a personal call from the school nurse, right?
Yeah, they've probably already gotten quite a few of those.
Okay.
But by this point in the school year.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. You had some really good information out there for the community regarding school vaccinations and stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity that you gave us to be able to talk about this.
Yeah, I'd like to have you guys back on. There's a lot of other 8th grade questions I'd like to ask you, but we don't have time for it.
Thank you, Joe.
So it's all good. I just a little background though. I was a hospital corpsman in the Navy for 4 years, and so I served, and I was really thinking of becoming a nurse. I wanted to be a nurse, and I veered off to being a film guy instead, which I don't know, but sometimes I think, well, it would have been a lot of fun being a nurse, right? But you don't think about that. But I just want to let you know that was definitely something. I appreciate everything you guys do, and I had some great nurses that I learned from when I was in the Navy too. That taught me a lot of good stuff, and were great. So thanks again for your service to the schools and to the community.
Yeah, thank you for your services.
Appreciate it. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our podcast. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Have a safe day. Adios.